Hello and welcome to Let's Squawk About It. Today's episode is brought to you by the Poultry Science Association's Committee on Animal Health. We're pleased to welcome Matthew Jones with the Southern Poultry Research Group to discuss Enterococcus cecorum. Matthew, welcome to the show. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do with SPRG?
Thanks, Sam. Happy to be here. So like you said, my name is Matthew Jones. I have a background in veterinary medicine as well as a PhD focusing on animal health and nutrition. So I work with Southern Poultry Research Group, where we do applied health-based poultry research, but we also do models, bacterial models, including Clostridium and Enterococcus.
Yeah, great. And like I mentioned, like you just mentioned right there, Enterococcus cecorum is what we're talking about today. So let's start by talking about what exactly it is.
Yes, so Enterococcus is a gram-positive bacteria. It's a commensal, so it's going to be in most all of the poultry in the United States. I think of it because of the lens I see the world in. We do a lot of necrotic studies. I think of it similar to Clostridium. So Clostridium is going to be in the intestine at a fairly high level, and a normal healthy bird. And that's similar to Enterococcus. It's going to be there at a high level in the intestine of a bird, but there are pathogenic isolates that can cause disease in tissues, can pass that GI tract barrier and go into different tissues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when we're talking about Enterococcus, what are some of the symptoms that we see with these birds, along with mortality rate? But let's talk about symptoms first.
Yeah, so maybe we can talk a little bit about the pathogenesis of Enterococcus, and then lead into some of those symptoms. So if we think about Enterococcus pathogenicity, what typically happens, and I say Enterococcus in general, there's several different isolates. We're talking about cecorum today, but there's also species like Faecalis and Faecium, which can also cause disease. And generally what they're going to do is they're going to cause a septicemia early on, and that septicemic event can cause mortality acutely. So we might see a spike in mortality early. And what's going to happen is that bacteria can set up into different tissues, like the pericardial tissue, or potentially the femoral head or the free thoracic vertebrae. And as it grows and causes an infection in those tissues, that's the secondary infections that we normally associate with Enterococcus. So that pericardial tissue infection is going to turn into pericarditis. The femoral head infection is going to turn into femoral head necrosis. And that free thoracic vertebra infection is going to turn into what we commonly associate with kinky back, which can be caused by a variety of bacteria, but a lot of times we do think of Enterococcus when we see that condition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you look at birds that have this, is there any type of like physical symptoms that you can see that you notice the bird has this going on?
Yeah, so generally speaking, what we're going to see is an increase in lameness over a fairly long amount of time. We're going to see increasing lameness as the birds age, and we're going to see increased culling in those flocks as well. Mm-hmm. So the mortality itself could remain quite low, but it does creep up as the birds are culled due to quality of life issues.
Yeah, and obviously when you see that mortality increase, is there a risk to the rest of the flock?
So the other birds probably are exposed to that pathogenic organism, but not all the birds are going to succumb to the disease. Mm-hmm. We're going to see general malaise as those birds respond to that bacterial infection, but we might only see that malaise, and then the manifestation is going to be a decrease in body weight gain over time.
Gotcha. So it's still obviously a pretty serious thing, but it's not at the same levels as like AI, for example, where we have to wipe out an entire flock.
Right. No, it's not going to be to the same extreme. Mm-hmm. And kind of on a different, it's different from avian influenza in that almost all of the birds in the US are going to be exposed to it. Right. Whereas with avian influenza, we're trying to bioexclude that. But yeah, it's a much lower and slower disease compared to AI, for sure.
And when we talk about this, do we know what kind of research is currently being done with Enterococcus cecorum?
Yeah, so when I think of Enterococcus, North Carolina State University has done quite a bit of research on Enterococcus cecorum and other species. Um, but it's really a fairly new, not new organism, but there is a lot of work and research that can be done in this area. We've seen an increase in interest over time. Let's say 3 or 4 years ago, we at SBRG we might do one Enterococcus trial a year, whereas in the last 6 months we've done four, and we have four queued for the next 6 months. So there's an increase in interest in running experiments on Enterococcus, likely due to perceived issues in the field.
Yeah. And with this growing interest, what future avenues do we see for research on this subject?
Yeah, so there are a lot of potential areas to grow in our understanding of Enterococcus, all the way from the model itself and how the different isolates cause disease to what products might positively influence a challenge in the field. And the field is probably a good place to start as far as research, understanding what the industry is dealing with, what isolates they're seeing, when they're seeing them, is probably a good place to start in our understanding, and then from there growing on the applied side and the fundamental research side for sure.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, Matthew, thanks for joining us today to talk about Enterococcus cecorum and some of the things that are being done, how it's affecting flocks and all that good stuff. On behalf of the Committee for Animal Health for the Poultry Science Association, we thank you for joining us today for this episode of Let's Squawk About It, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Thanks.